Imagine accidentally assaulting a billionaire with cheap vanilla perfume and a live rooster in the middle of a crowded market. That's exactly how Zoe's Tuesday started. She didn't just ruin Declan O'Malley's expensive suit, she marked him. But when this terrifying, grumpy alpha corners her in an alleyway later that night, he doesn't want an apology. He sniffs the air, eyes glowing gold in the dark, and growls the 3 words that change everything. "Now you smell like mine." Get ready, because this isn't just a romance. It's a collision course. Welcome back to the pack, and a huge hello to our new listeners. You are tuning in to At Lena's Romantasy Collection, your home for swoon-worthy stories and magical escapes. If you're ready for the alpha, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a chapter, and ring that notification bell to be the first to know when the next part drops. Share this with a friend who needs a little romance today. I want to know where my pack is hiding. Drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? Let's get into the story. Chapter 1. Sugar Bomb Surprise. The air at the Pike Place pop-up market smelled of roasted coffee, rain-slicked asphalt, and the distinct, aggressive sweetness of failure. Zoe Prentiss stood behind her folding table, shivering in her paint-stained overalls, trying to look like a visionary perfumer rather than a 22-year-old woman who was currently eating instant ramen for both lunch and dinner. "Step right up," Zoe called out, her voice cracking slightly over the din of the Seattle crowd. "Experience the olfactory delight of Sugar Bomb Surprise. It's sweet, it's subtle, it's on sale for $9.99. It was not subtle. It smelled like a vanilla bean had been murdered by a candy cane in a sugar factory. It was her worst creation to date, born from a desperate need to use up a bulk shipment of cheap vanilla extract she'd bought by mistake. "No thanks, honey," a woman muttered, wrinkling her nose as she hurried past, clutching her umbrella like a shield. Zoe sighed, pushing a stray curl out of her face with a pencil. "Everyone's a critic," she muttered to the plastic crate sitting in the sidecar of her parked scooter. "Right, Tabby?" From inside the crate, a disgruntled clucking sound emerged. Tabby was not a cat. Tabby was a white leghorn rooster with an attitude problem and a comb that flopped over one eye like an emo teenager. He was currently illegal in this zoning district, much like Zoe's unauthorized street vending setup. Suddenly, the crowd parted. It wasn't a polite shuffling, it was a instinctual retreat. People moved aside the way small fish scatter when a shark enters the reef. Walking through the gap was a man who occupied space like a storm front moving in. He was massive, broad-shouldered, clad in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Zoe's entire life earnings, with a scruffy beard that failed to soften the harsh angles of his jaw. He didn't look at the stalls. He looked straight ahead, radiating a do-not-perceive-me energy that was terrifyingly effective. Zoe stared. He was objectively gorgeous, in a terrifying mountain man forced into corporate wear kind of way. Cluck. Screech! Zoe spun around. Tabby had managed to undo the latch of his crate with his beak. The rooster exploded out of the sidecar, flapping his wings in a flurry of white feathers in rage. "Tabby, no!" Zoe shrieked. She lunged for the bird. She missed. Her hand flailed, knocking into her display pyramid of Sugar Bomb Surprise. One of the glass tester bottles went airborne. It sailed through the air in a perfect, damning arc. The massive man in the suit turned his head just in time to catch 75 milliliters of concentrated vanilla syrup squarely in the center of his chest. Smash! The bottle shattered against a pectoral muscle that felt like a steel plate. Amber liquid exploded outward, soaking his silk tie, his crisp white shirt, and the lapels of his charcoal jacket. The market went silent. Zoe froze, her hand outstretched. Oh no! The man looked down at his chest. He took a slow breath. He blinked. He slowly lifted his gaze to Zoe. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to sunlight, golden, burning, and intense. Zoe scrambled over the table, grabbing a dirty rag she used to clean spills. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. It washes out. Probably. Just here." She reached him and started frantically scrubbing at his chest, babbling in panic. "You lumberjack in a suit! Why didn't you dodge? Who stands there and lets a bottle hit them? That was $10 of inventory." She was insulting him while cleaning him. It was a defense mechanism. Fight, flight, or roast. The man didn't move. He didn't yell. He caught her wrist. His grip was warm and calloused, stopping her frantic scrubbing instantly. Zoe gasped, looking up. He was so tall she had to crane her neck. He wasn't looking at the stain. He was looking at her. He leaned down, inhaling deeply near her neck. His nostrils flared. A low, vibrating sound rumbled in his sternum, something too deep to be a hum, too articulate to be a growl. It vibrated right through the soles of her boots. "Now," he rasped, his voice rough like gravel tumbling down a hill. "You smell like mine." The sheer audacity of the statement snapped Zoe out of her panic. "Excuse me?" she yelped. She stomped her combat boot hard onto the toe of his expensive leather shoe. "Pervert!" he grunted, loosening his grip. Zoe snatched her hand back, grabbed the confused rooster by his torso like a football, and sprinted for her scooter. "Wait!" the man shouted, sounding more confused than angry. Zoe didn't wait. She kick-started her neon-pink 1980s Vespa. It backfired with a sound like a gunshot. Pow! And she peeled out of the market, leaving a trail of black smoke and the cloying scent of burnt vanilla in her wake. Chapter 2. The Scent of a Crisis. The headquarters of O'Malley Logistics was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the rainy Seattle skyline. It was designed to intimidate. It smelled of ozone, polished concrete, and serious money. Today, however, the executive floor smelled like a bakery that had exploded. Declan O'Malley stormed out of the elevator, radiating fury. His assistant, a young wolf named Sera, took one sniff, widened her eyes, and immediately pretended to be very busy with a stapler. "Declan, seriously," a voice called out. Benji, Declan's beta and head of IT, jogged to keep up. Benji was lanky, wore suspenders unironically, and was the only person in the building who didn't tremble when Declan was in a mood. "You smell like a stripper's car air freshener. Please, for the love of the pack, go shower. The HVAC system is going to need an exorcism." "I'm not showering," Declan growled, slamming the door to his office. Benji slipped in before the door closed. "You have a meeting with the Port Authority in 20 minutes. You are covered in sticky sugar water. Why are you protecting the shirt? Did you lose a bet?" Declan paced to the window, staring out at the gray city. He was covered in sticky sugar water. The cheap perfume was cloying and headache-inducing, but underneath the chemical vanilla, there was something else. Lavender, rainwater, and a sharp electric zing of ozone that made his wolf pace circles in his mind, howling at the moon. Mate. The word echoed in his skull, primal and undeniable. He had waited 32 years for the scent. He had expected it to be dignified. He had expected to find her at a gala, or perhaps during a run in the forest. He had not expected to be assaulted by a glass bottle thrown by a woman in paint-stained overalls who called him a lumberjack and then assaulted his foot. "It's not just perfume," Declan said, his voice tight. He touched the stain on his chest, right over his heart. "It's her." Benji paused, adjusting his glasses. "Her? Who is her?" "The woman on the scooter," Declan said. He turned, his eyes flashing gold for a fraction of a second. "The woman who threw this at me." "Someone threw things at the Alpha?" Benji looked horrified. "And she lives?" "She kicked me," Declan murmured, a strange, dazed smile touching his lips. "She called me a pervert. She drives a pink scooter that sounds like a cannon." Benji stared at him. "Okay, you're in shock, or you've inhaled too many fumes. Go shower, I'll get you a new suit." "No," Declan commanded. "I need you to pull the security footage from the Pike Place perimeter." "For a lawsuit?" "To find her," Declan said, inhaling the scent off his own lapel again like a maniac. "Find the pink scooter, find the license plate. I need to know who she is. Now." Benji sighed, pulling out his tablet. Stalking via traffic cam. Romantic. If this turns into a kidnapping charge, I'm not bailing you out. Declan ignored him. He stripped off the jacket, but instead of throwing it in the trash, he draped it carefully over his leather chair. The wolf inside him settled, content for the first time in a decade, surrounded by the terrible, wonderful smell of his mate. Chapter 3. The Landlady and the Bird. Zoe's apartment was less of a living space and more of a glorified closet with plumbing. It was located above a laundromat in Fremont, which meant the floor was always warm and everything she owned smelled faintly of dryer sheets. "We are ruined, Tabby," Zoe groaned, flopping face first onto her futon. Ruined. Tabby, who was currently pecking at a stray Cheerio on the rug, paused to let out a judgmental bwark. "Don't give me that look," Zoe said, rolling over to glare at the rooster. "That suit cost more than my kidney. Did you see the way he looked at me? You smell like mine." "What does that even mean? Is he a serial killer? Does he make skin suits?" She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. The adrenaline of the escape was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. The broken tester bottle was a $10 loss. She hadn't sold a single unit today. Rent was due on Tuesday, and she was currently $40 short. She looked around the room. Vials of essential oils lined the windowsills, catching the gray light. Beakers of experiments, midnight jasmine, urban decay, citrus punch, cluttered every surface. She was a scent alchemist. She had a nose that could distinguish between Bulgarian and Turkish rose oil blindfolded, but talent didn't pay the bills. Marketing did, and her marketing strategy currently involved assaulting pedestrians. Bang! 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 The door rattled in its frame. "Zoe! Open up!" Zoe winced. It was Mrs. Higgins. She shuffled to the door and cracked it open. Mrs. Higgins stood there, clutching her walker. She was 85, mostly deaf, and convinced that Zoe was hiding a large dog. "Mrs. Higgins, you look lovely!" Zoe shouted, aiming for the good ear. "I heard the dog again," Mrs. Higgins shouted back. "Barking! Screeching! It sounds like a dying banshee!" "No pets allowed, Zoe. Only fish." "It was the TV," Zoe lied smoothly. "I was watching a nature documentary about wolves." From behind her, Tabby let out a loud, definitive cock-a-doodle-doo. Mrs. Higgins squinted. "That's a weird dog." "It's a foreign breed," Zoe promised, sweating. "I'll turn the volume down. Sorry." She slammed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until she hit the floor. "You are going to get us evicted," she whispered to the bird. Tabby flapped his wings and settled on the back of the futon, looking regal and unbothered. Zoe buried her face in her hands. She was lonely. God, she was lonely. She spent her days arguing with strangers and her nights arguing with a bird. She wanted someone to talk to who didn't cluck. She wanted someone to hold her who wasn't made of feathers. For a split second, her mind flashed back to the man in the market. The sheer size of him, the heat radiating off his chest when she'd touched him, the way his golden eyes had looked at her, not with annoyance, but with a terrifying, singular focus. Mine. Zoe shivered. "Stop it," she scolded herself. "He's a rich weirdo who probably wants to sue you. Focus on the rent." She stood up and walked to her workstation in the bathroom. The ventilation was better. She needed a miracle. Or a winning lottery ticket. Or for Sugar Bomb Surprise to suddenly become a viral trend. A heavy, authoritative knock sounded at the door. Not the rattle of Mrs. Higgins. This was a knock that demanded an answer. Zoe froze. "Police?" she whispered. "Did he call the cops?" She crept to the peephole. Standing in the hallway, filling the entire fisheye lens with broad shoulders and a scowl, was the lumberjack suit. Chapter 4. The Bulk Buyer. Zoe's first instinct was to barricade the door. Her second instinct was to grab the chili oil spray she kept on the key hook. She did neither. She took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door exactly 2 inches, leaving the security chain on. "I have no money," she announced through the crack. If you're here for dry cleaning costs, I can offer you a payment plan of $5 a month for the next 80 years. Declan O'Malley stood in the hallway. He had changed his shirt, but he was still wearing the same trousers. He looked even bigger in the narrow corridor. His head nearly brushed the ceiling light fixture. He blinked, looking down at the slice of her face visible through the gap. "I'm not here for the dry cleaning." "Then why are you stalking me?" Zoe snapped. "And how did you find me? Did you sniff me out? Because that's creepy." Declan flinched slightly. That was exactly what he had done, with the help of a license plate search, but he wasn't going to admit that. "I want to buy the perfume," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in the small hallway. Zoe paused. "Excuse me?" "The vanilla one," Declan clarified. He looked pained, as if admitting this physically hurt him. "I want to buy your entire stock." Zoe stared at him. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a sharp, brittle sound. "Okay, joke's over," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You're mocking me. What is this? Some rich guy power trip? You track down the poor girl who ruined your shirt and try to humiliate her by buying her trash?" "It's not trash," Declan lied. "It was absolutely trash. I enjoy the scent." "You drive a G-Wagon, buddy," Zoe scoffed, glancing past him out the hallway window where his massive black SUV was double parked. "I saw you pull up. Men who drive tanks like that do not wear perfume that smells like a stripper's car air freshener. You're pitying me." "I don't do pity," Declan growled, his patience fraying. He just wanted to be near her. He wanted to be inside the apartment. The chain on the door was an insult to his wolf. "Open the door, Zoe." "You know my name?" She bristled. "Okay, stalker level 10. I don't need charity from a man whose neck is thicker than my thigh. Go away!" She moved to slam the door. Declan's hand shot out. He didn't push. He just placed his palm flat against the wood, stopping it effortlessly. "I am trying," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "To be polite, I am trying to support your business. Why are you so difficult?" "Because I have dignity!" Zoe shouted, leaning her weight against the door, which was like trying to push back a glacier. "And my pride is the only thing I have left. I don't take handouts from giants." Declan looked at her through the crack. Her eyes were flashing with fire. Her hair was a mess. She was infuriating. She was magnificent. The wolf inside him didn't want to buy perfume. The wolf wanted to tear the door off its hinges, carry her to the bed, and curl around her until she stopped fighting. "I'm not asking for a handout," Declan said, his amber eyes burning. "I'm asking to come in. We need to talk." "About what? My insurance premium?" "About us." "There is no us," Zoe yelled. "There is me, and there is the guy who is currently trespassing." "Zoe," he warned, stepping closer. "Let me in." Zoe looked at the chain. It looked flimsy. She looked at his face, handsome, stubborn, and terrifyingly intense. "Fine," she whispered, "but if you try anything, I have a guard dog." She undid the chain. Chapter 5. Feathered Fury. Declan felt a surge of triumph as the lock clicked. He pushed the door open and stepped into the apartment. It was tiny. It smelled of lavender, chemicals, and old books. It was chaos, cluttered with bottles and clothes, but to him, it smelled like home. "Okay, you're in," Zoe said, backing away toward the kitchen counter, her hand hovering near a glass beaker. "Say your piece and get out." Declan took a step forward, his eyes scanning the room. He wanted to check for threats. He wanted to mark the territory. He wanted to... Screech! From the top of a bookshelf, a white missile launched itself into the air. Declan's reflexes were supernatural. He could catch a fly in midair. He could dodge a punch before it was thrown. He was not prepared for a rooster. Tabby hit him squarely in the chest, claws scrabbling for purchase on his silk tie. Wings beat against Declan's face, blinding him. The bird let out a sound that was half shriek, half war cry. "What the hell?" Declan shouted, stumbling back. He flailed, trying to grab the bird without crushing it, because he sensed that killing the pet would ruin his chances with the mate. "Tabby! Get him!" Zoe cheered from the kitchen. "It's a chicken!" Declan roared, ducking as the rooster pecked aggressively at his ear. "Why do you have a chicken indoors?" "He's a rooster," Zoe corrected, grabbing a bag of birdseed. "And he hates men! Go for the eyes, Tabby!" Tabby flapped his wings, creating a cloud of dust and feathers. Declan O'Malley, the alpha of the Seattle pack, the man who terrified business rivals and rival wolves alike, was forced to retreat. He backed out into the hallway, shielding his face with his arms. Tabby landed on the floor, puffed out his chest, and let out a victorious crow that echoed through the building. From inside the apartment, Zoe burst out laughing. It wasn't the brittle laugh from earlier. It was a full, belly laugh. She was doubled over, clutching the counter, tears in her eyes. "Oh my God!" she wheezed. "Your face! You looked so scared. It's a bird, lumberjack. A 10-pound bird." Declan stood in the hallway, adjusting his disheveled tie. There was a small scratch on his cheek that was already healing. He should have been furious. He should have been humiliated. But he watched her laugh. He watched the way her nose crinkled and her shoulders shook. The anger evaporated. The wolf settled, wagging its metaphorical tail. "She's perfect," the wolf decided. "Feisty, protected, dangerous." "You're laughing," Declan said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I am." Zoe wiped her eyes, still grinning. "Best Tuesday ever. Okay, you survived the trial by combat. What do you want, really?" Declan straightened his jacket. He looked at the rooster, who was watching him with malice. He looked at Zoe. "Dinner," he said. Zoe blinked. "What?" "I don't want the perfume," Declan admitted. "I want dinner. With you." Zoe's smile faded slightly, replaced by suspicion. "You want to date me?" "I want to feed you," Declan corrected. "You look like you live on ramen." "I like ramen," Zoe defended, crossing her arms. "Steak," Declan countered. "Real food. Tonight, 7 o'clock. "And if I say no?" Declan glanced at the rooster. "Then I will come back tomorrow, and I will bring armor for the bird." Zoe looked at him. Really looked at him. He was crazy. He was intense. But he wasn't leaving. "Fine," she sighed. "But if you murder me, Tabby will find you." "I'm counting on it," Declan said. 7 o'clock, Zoe." He turned and walked down the hallway, leaving Zoe standing in the doorway of her tiny apartment, staring at his retreating back, wondering why the hell she had just said yes to a man who had lost a fight with a chicken. Chapter 6. The Stalking, Market Edition. The following morning, Pike Place Market was bustling with the usual chaotic symphony of fishmongers shouting, tourists gasping at overpriced tulips, and the rumble of delivery trucks. Zoe Prentiss, however, was experiencing a significant drop in foot traffic. Usually, her booth, Zoe's Alchemical Wonders, attracted a steady stream of curious customers drawn in by the colorful bottles and the erratic behavior of Tabby, who sat in his crate judging passers-by. Today, however, people were giving her stall a wide berth. They would approach, eyes lighting up at the "buy one, get one free" sign, and then their gazes would drift to the left. Their smiles would falter, their survival instincts would kick in, and they would abruptly remember they needed to be literally anywhere else. Zoe sighed, capping a bottle of midnight jasmine. She leaned over the table and glared at the source of the disturbance. "You are bad for business, O'Malley." Declan O'Malley stood 6 feet away, leaning against a brick pillar with his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing casual clothes today, dark jeans and a black Henley that clung to him in a way that should be illegal in a public space. He looked less like a CEO and more like a high-end bouncer for a secret society. "I am observing," Declan rumbled, his golden brown eyes tracking a man who had lingered too long near Zoe's cash box. The man scurried away under the weight of the alpha's glare. "You're looming," Zoe corrected. You look like you're waiting for a signal to break someone's kneecaps. Why aren't you at work? Don't you have a logistics empire to run? Or a forest to chop down with your bare hands? I took the day off, Declan lied. He hadn't taken a day off in 7 years, but his wolf was currently refusing to leave a 10-foot radius of the mate. The instinct to guard was overwhelming, like a physical itch under his skin. This neighborhood isn't safe. It's a farmer's market, Declan. The biggest threat here is a bruised peach. Zoe walked around her table, brandishing a feather duster like a weapon. She marched up to him, feeling ridiculous as she had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. He smelled delicious today, like rain, pine needles, and expensive detergent. It was annoying. "Go away," she ordered. "You are scaring the tourists. I have $40 to my name, and I need to sell at least 3 bottles of citrus punch before noon, or I'm eating birdseed with Tabby tonight." Declan frowned. The mention of her poverty made his jaw clench. He reached for his wallet. If you try to buy my inventory again, I will spray you with sugar bomb surprise," Zoe threatened, pointing the duster at his chest. "And I brewed a fresh batch. It's stickier." Declan's hand froze. A corner of his mouth twitched upward. He liked it when she threatened him. It was confusingly attractive. "Fine," he relented, pushing off the pillar. "I will move back 10 feet, but I am not leaving." "Why?" Zoe demanded, exasperated. "We had dinner last night. It was fine. You ate a cow. I ate a salad. We established that you are weirdly rich and I am weirdly broke. Why are you still hovering?" "Because," Declan said, his voice dropping to that gravelly register that made her insides do a traitorous little flip. "You are unprotected." "I have a rooster and pepper spray," Zoe countered. "I am the most protected woman in Seattle." Declan just stared at her, a look of profound patience on his face, as if she were a kitten hissing at a thunderstorm. He moved exactly 10 feet back, crossed his massive arms again, and resumed his glare. Zoe groaned and returned to her stool. "He's a gargoyle," she whispered to Tabby. "A sexy, stubborn gargoyle." Tabby clucked in agreement and pecked at the lock of his crate. Chapter 7. The Competition. By noon, the rain had started, a quintessential Seattle drizzle that turned the pavement slick. Zoe was frantically trying to cover her wares with a plastic tarp when a shadow fell over her table. It wasn't Declan. "You're in my spot, Prentiss." Zoe straightened up, wiping rain from her eyes. Standing there was Gary, a vendor who sold imported sunglasses that were clearly knockoffs from a gas station. Gary was greasy, wore a leather jacket that squeaked, and had been trying to bully Zoe out of her prime corner location for months. "Map says C4, Zoe said, pointing to the painted number on the asphalt. "This is C4, you're C5, Gary. Go peddle your plastic aviators over there." "I requested a transfer," Gary sneered, stepping closer. He kicked the leg of her folding table. The bottles rattled ominously. "This corner gets better foot traffic. Move your trash or I'll move it for you." "Touch my table again," Zoe warned, her hand drifting toward her pocket where the chili spray lived, "and you'll be crying sriracha tears for a week." "Feisty," Gary laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. He reached out and shoved her display pyramid. Glass shattered. 3 bottles of ocean mist hit the ground. "Oops," Gary smirked. The air pressure in the market suddenly dropped. The hairs on Zoe's arms stood up, not from the cold, but from a sudden static charge of pure violence radiating from behind her. Gary's smirk vanished. He looked over Zoe's shoulder, his eyes widening. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on train tracks. "Problem?" a voice rumbled. It wasn't a question. It was a tectonic plate shifting. Zoe turned. Declan was there. He wasn't crossing his arms anymore. He was standing with his hands loose at his sides, his shoulders hunched slightly forward like a predator preparing to launch. His eyes were burning with a terrifying, golden intensity. She's in my spot," Gary stammered, taking a step back. Declan didn't look at Gary. He looked at the broken glass near Zoe's boots. You broke her things. It was an accident, Gary lied, sweating despite the chill. Declan stepped past Zoe. He moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size. He walked up to Gary's wooden vending stall, a heavy, solid oak structure loaded with inventory. You wanted to move? Declan asked softly. He reached out, grabbing the corner post of Gary's stall with one hand. Zoe watched, expecting him to shove it. Instead, Declan's knuckles went white. The veins in his forearm bulged against his skin. With a low grunt of exertion, he lifted the entire stall, inventory, wood, and all, 6 inches off the ground. The wood groaned under the stress. Gary squeaked. Zoe's jaw dropped. That stall had to weigh 300 pounds. Declan walked forward, carrying the entire structure as if it were a cardboard box. He marched 20 feet down the sidewalk, past the boundaries of the market, and dropped it with a heavy thud near the dumpsters. He dusted off his hands and walked back. He stopped in front of a terrified Gary. You're in CZ, Declan deadpanned. That stands for construction zone. Stay there. Gary grabbed a handful of sunglasses and ran toward his relocated shop. Zoe stood frozen, rain dripping off her nose. She looked at the heavy oak stall down the block. She looked at Declan, who wasn't even breathing hard. How? She whispered. How did you do that? Declan adjusted his cuffs, the golden light fading from his eyes, replaced by a guarded mask. Adrenaline, he claimed. He threatened you. That wasn't adrenaline, Zoe said, narrowing her eyes. That was a forklift impression. Who are you, O'Malley? Chapter 8. The Carnivore. We are going to lunch, Zoe announced, grabbing Declan's arm. And we are going somewhere loud, so you stop scaring the locals. She dragged him to Betty's Bucket, a greasy spoon diner 3 blocks away that smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. It was the kind of place where the waitresses called everyone sugar and the menu was sticky. Declan looked out of place in the vinyl booth. He took up too much space. His knees brushed against hers under the table, sending jilts of electricity up her legs that she stubbornly ignored. I'll have the garden salad, Zoe told the waitress, and he will have 4 ribeyes, Declan said. Rare. Blue, if the chef allows it. The waitress paused, her pen hovering over the pad. 4? Like, separate steaks? Or do you want the platter? 4 steaks, Declan repeated seriously, and a side of bacon. And a Diet Coke, Zoe added. He's watching his figure. When the food arrived, it was a mountain of meat. Zoe watched in morbid fascination as Declan consumed it. He didn't eat like a glutton. He ate with a precise, terrifying efficiency. He cut the meat, swallowed it almost whole, and moved to the next bite. It was primal. It was the way a nature documentary narrator would describe a feeding frenzy. Do you have a tapeworm? Zoe asked, poking at her lettuce. Or are you training for a strongman competition? Because after that stunt with the stall earlier, I'm leaning toward performance enhancers. Declan paused, a fork halfway to his mouth. My metabolism runs high. High? Declan, you're eating a cow. A whole cow. She reached across the table to steal a piece of bacon, her fingers brushing against the back of his hand. She flinched. His skin wasn't just warm, it was burning. It felt like touching a car hood that had been sitting in the sun. You're burning up, Zoe said, concern overriding her snark. She placed her palm against his forehead. It was scorching. You have a fever. Oh my God, are you sick? Is that why you're delirious enough to stalk me? Declan closed his eyes at her touch. He leaned into her palm instinctively, a low rumble building in his chest. He looked like a man starving for water who had just been offered a drop. I'm not sick, he rasped, his eyes opening. They were darker now, the pupils blown wide. I run hot. It's normal. Normal is 98.6 degrees, Zoe argued, pulling her hand back. You're at least 103. You should be in a hospital, not eating raw beef. I'm fine, Zoe. He grabbed her hand before she could retreat completely, lacing his fingers through hers. His grip was inescapable. "Stop worrying." "I'm not worrying," Zoe lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm just concerned you're going to die at my table and stick me with the bill." But as she looked at him, the impossible strength, the furnace-like heat, the carnivorous appetite, a cold knot of suspicion began to form in her stomach. Steroids, she thought. Experimental drugs. Underground fighting ring. Whatever Declan O'Malley was involved in, it wasn't just logistics. Chapter 9. The Beta's Warning. 2 days later, Declan was absent from the market. He had sent a text saying he had urgent logistics issues to handle, which Zoe assumed meant he was off lifting cars or eating livestock elsewhere. She was surprisingly bored without him looming over her shoulder. "Don't look at me like that," she told Tabby, who was sitting on the table clucking softly. "I don't miss him. I miss the security. It's different." "Excuse me? Ms. Prentiss?" Zoe looked up. Standing in front of her booth was the lanky guy in suspenders she had seen with Declan once or twice. He looked nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses and checking his surroundings. "Benji, right?" Zoe asked. "The IT guy?" "Head of operations," Benji corrected, though he looked more like a librarian who had lost his way. "Listen, I don't have much time. Declan is in a meeting with the board. I wanted to talk to you." "Did he send you to buy perfume?" Zoe asked, reaching for a bottle. "Because I have a strictly no-pity sales policy." "No," Benji said, leaning in closer. "I came to warn you." Zoe paused. "Warn me? Is he dangerous? Is he a criminal?" Benji laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Criminal? No, God, no. He's honorable, to a fault. But he is intense, Zoe. You have to understand, men like Declan, when they decide they want something, they don't have an off switch. It's biological." "Biological?" Zoe frowned. "What does that mean? Is this a genetic thing?" "You could say that," Benji muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Look, just be careful. He's trying to be gentle, but he doesn't know how. He's used to running the whole forest. I mean, the whole industry. If you push him too hard, he might snap. And I don't mean he'll hit you. I mean he'll lock you down, isolate you, keep you." Zoe felt a chill run down her spine. "Keep me? Like a pet?" "Like a treasure," Benji corrected. "Just don't go poking around O'Malley Logistics at night. And maybe stop kicking him. It confuses his instincts." Before Zoe could ask what the hell that meant, Benji's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and paled. "I have to go. He knows I'm here." Benji scurried away into the crowd, leaving Zoe standing there with more questions than answers. "Biological instincts," she whispered. "Running the forest? Does he mean the timber industry? Keeping me?" She looked at her scooter. She looked at the address for O'Malley Logistics she had Googled the night before. "Benji just told me not to poke around at night," she told Tabby, pulling on her helmet. "Which means we are absolutely poking around tonight." Chapter 10. The Warehouse. The industrial district of Seattle was a graveyard of shipping containers and rusted cranes at night. The fog rolled in off the sound, thick and cold, obscuring the streetlights. Zoe parked her neon-pink Vespa 3 blocks away from O'Malley Logistics to avoid the noise. The scooter's backfire sounded like a cannon shot, which wasn't conducive to stealth operations. She crept toward the massive warehouse complex on foot, clutching her can of chili oil spray like a talisman. "This is a bad idea," she whispered to herself. "This is how horror movies start. The girl goes to the warehouse and finds out the boyfriend is chopping up bodies." The main gate was locked, but there was a gap in the chain-link fence around the back loading dock. Zoe squeezed through, ripping the pocket of her overalls. She hid behind a stack of wooden pallets, peering into the open bay doors of the warehouse. Inside, the lights were humming. It wasn't a chop shop. It wasn't a drug den. It looked like a normal shipping facility. Then she saw Declan. He was wearing a tank top, his skin glistening with sweat. He was moving crates, but he wasn't using a forklift. Zoe watched, breath hitched in her throat, as Declan walked up to a solid steel industrial generator crate, something that had to weigh 1/4 of a ton. He squatted, gripped the bottom, and lifted it. He didn't struggle. He didn't turn red. He lifted it to shoulder height and walked it across the floor as if it were a pillow. He stacked it on top of another crate that was 8 feet in the air. He moved with a blurring speed. One moment he was by the door, the next he was across the room. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. Another man walked in, one of the security guards. He threw a heavy wrench to Declan from 30 feet away. Declan didn't even look. His hand just snapped up and caught it out of the air, his reflexes faster than humanly possible. "Drug ring," Zoe whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's a super soldier, or a cyborg, or he's on enough steroids to kill a horse." She took a step back, needing to get away, to process this. Crunch! Her boot landed squarely on a dry plastic water bottle someone had discarded near the pallets. The sound echoed in the quiet night like a gunshot. Inside the warehouse, Declan froze. He didn't turn around slowly. He spun with that same terrifying, blurring speed. His eyes locked instantly onto the exact spot where she was hiding in the shadows. Even from 50 yards away, Zoe saw them. They weren't brown. They were glowing. Incandescent, predatory gold. Zoe didn't wait to see more. She turned and ran. Chapter 11. The Alleyway Confrontation. Zoe Prentiss had never run a 4-minute mile, but terror was a powerful motivator. She scrambled over the chain-link fence, ripping the knee of her overalls, and landed hard on the cracked asphalt of the alleyway. Her breath hitched in her throat, burning like she'd swallowed acid. She didn't look back at the warehouse. She didn't want to see if the golden eyes were following her. She sprinted toward the neon pink smudge in the distance that was her Vespa. "Start!" she hissed, jamming the key into the ignition with shaking hands. "Start, you piece of junk!" She twisted the throttle too hard, flooding the engine. The scooter sputtered, coughed a plume of black smoke, and fell silent. "No!" Zoe slammed her palm against the handlebars, tears pricking her eyes. "Don't do this! Not now!" "Zoe." The voice didn't come from behind her. It came from everywhere, bouncing off the brick walls of the alley, low and resonant. Zoe spun around, her hand diving into her pocket. She ripped out the small spray bottle of chili oil concentrate, her homemade, artisan-grade pepper spray. Declan O'Malley stood 10 feet away. He wasn't winded. He wasn't sweating. He stood under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp, his chest heaving slightly, his hands held up in a placating gesture. The golden glow was gone from his eyes, replaced by a desperate, human darkness, but Zoe knew what she had seen. "Stay back!" she screamed, holding the bottle out like a holy cross. "I swear to God, O'Malley, this is concentrated ghost pepper oil. I will melt your corneas." "Zoe, listen to me," Declan said, taking a slow step forward. "No! No listening!" Zoe backed up until her hips hit the handlebars of her scooter. "I know what you are. I saw the crates. I saw you lift that thing like it was styrofoam." "It's not what you think," Declan said, his voice strained. "Not what I think?" Zoe laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "You're running a drug ring. That's what this is, right? You're on some kind of experimental military steroid? Or you're a cyborg? Tell me you're not a cyborg, Declan, because that would be really disappointing." "I am not a cyborg," he said, looking offended despite the situation. "And I don't touch drugs." "Then what?" Zoe demanded, tears of fear pricking at her eyes. "Normal people don't have flashlights for eyes. Normal people don't lift forklifts. I can't be part of this. I sell perfume, Declan. I have a rooster. I can't go to federal prison because my boyfriend is Captain America's evil twin." The word boyfriend hung in the damp air between them. Declan's expression shattered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the trembling of her hands. He saw the genuine terror. He realized that his silence had let her imagination run wild, painting him as a criminal, a monster of human making. "I'm not a criminal," Declan said softly. "I have never broken a law that matters, but I can't explain this here." "I am not going anywhere with you," Zoe snapped, aiming the spray nozzle at his face. "You have to," Declan said, "because if I don't show you, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. You deserve the truth, Zoe, even if it scares you." He walked toward his G-Wagon, which was parked silently at the mouth of the alley. He opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Please, let me show you what I am, and if you still want to run after that, I'll let you go." Zoe looked at the chili spray. She looked at the dead scooter. She looked at Declan, who looked less like a monster and more like a man walking to his own execution. "If you kill me," she whispered, "Tabby is going to be so annoying at the funeral." She lowered the spray, but she didn't put it away. She walked past him and climbed into the truck. Chapter 12. The Drive to Nowhere. The interior of the G-Wagon smelled of leather and Declan. Usually, Zoe found the scent comforting, a mix of rain and pine that made her want to bury her face in his neck. Tonight, it smelled like a cage. They drove in silence. The city lights of Seattle faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the looming shadows of the industrial outskirts. Declan navigated the roads with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. He didn't look at her. He seemed to be vibrating with a tension that filled the cabin, making the air feel thick and hard to breathe. Zoe clutched her seatbelt strap with one hand and her chili oil with the other. Her mind was racing through worst-case scenarios. "Mafia hit," she decided. "He's taking me to a secondary location. A shallow grave. Or maybe a secret government lab. I'm going to end up as a test subject for a new cologne called Deceased." "Where are we going?" Zoe asked, her voice small in the quiet cab. "Somewhere private," Declan replied. His voice was rough, like he had swallowed gravel. "Somewhere I won't hurt anyone." That didn't help. "Hurt anyone?" Zoe repeated, her pitch rising. "Declan, are you sick? Is this contagious?" "No," he said shortly. "It's genetic." He pulled the massive SUV into a deserted lot behind an abandoned paper mill. It was a wasteland of cracked concrete and overgrown weeds, surrounded by a high fence. It was the kind of place where bad things happened in movies. Declan killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening. He turned to face her. In the gloom, his eyes looked dark, almost black. He looked exhausted, lines of strain bracketing his mouth. "Zoe," he said, "what you are about to see, it's ugly, it's violent, but it's me. It's the part of me I've been trying to keep away from you." "Why show me now?" Zoe asked, pressing her back against the door. "Because you think I'm a liar," Declan said, "and I can handle you hating me. I can handle you fearing me, but I can't handle you thinking I would ever lie to you." He opened his door and stepped out into the night. "Stay in the car," he ordered through the open window. "Lock the doors, and whatever happens, do not run." Zoe locked the doors immediately. She watched through the windshield as Declan walked to the center of the lot, about 30 yards away. He stripped off his shirt. Under the moonlight, his back was a landscape of muscle and old, faint scars. He stood there for a moment, head bowed, shoulders hunched. He looked like a man praying. Then he screamed. Chapter 13. The Shift. It wasn't a scream of pain exactly. It was a sound that didn't belong in a human throat, a guttural, tearing roar that raised every hair on Zoe's arms. Zoe watched, her nose pressed against the cold glass, waiting for something. Magic? Sparkles? A costume change? What happened was biology gone wrong. Declan fell to his knees. His spine arched violently, and a sickening crack echoed across the lot, loud enough to be heard through the sealed glass of the SUV. Zoe flinched. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's breaking. He's dying." He wasn't dying. He was rearranging. His shoulders dislocated with a wet pop. His ribcage expanded, the bones audibly snapping and reshaping, stretching the skin until it looked translucent. Dark fur erupted along his spine, not growing softly, but bursting through the pores and patches. He slammed his hands onto the concrete. His fingers lengthened, the nails turning black and curving into claws that scraped sparks against the pavement. Zoe clamped her hands over her mouth to stop herself from vomiting. It was grotesque. It was a body turning inside out. His jaw unhinged, elongating into a muzzle with a spray of blood and saliva. His legs snapped backward at the knees, reshaping into hawks. The sound was the worst part. The wet tearing of muscle, the grinding of bone on bone, the low, agonized whining of a creature being born from the ruin of a man. It lasted 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Where Declan O'Malley had been kneeling, a monster now stood. It shook itself, a spray of dark fluid flying from its coat. It was a wolf, but it was too big to be a wolf. It was the size of a pony, massive and broad-chested, covered in fur as black as a void. The creature raised its massive head and sniffed the air. It turned slowly toward the car. Zoe stared into its eyes. They were gold. They were Declan's eyes, trapped in the skull of a nightmare. "No," Zoe whimpered, her brain finally short-circuiting. The logic of the world, perfume, rent, roosters, dissolved. "That's not real. That's a bear. That's a demon." The wolf took a step toward the car. Its paws were the size of dinner plates. Its teeth were white daggers glinting in the moonlight. Zoe didn't think about love. She didn't think about the dinner they shared. She thought about the fact that she was a soft, fleshy thing in a metal box, and there was an apex predator outside looking for a snack. Chapter 14. Primal Fear. The wolf chuffed, a sound that was probably meant to be a greeting, but to Zoe, it sounded like a prelude to murder. It walked toward the driver's side door. It lowered its massive head, bringing its wet black nose level with the window glass. It stared at her, ears perked forward. Zoe screamed. It was a raw, primal sound that scraped her throat raw. Panic, hot and white, flooded her system. She scrambled backward, climbing over the center console into the passenger seat, kicking at the dashboard, trying to get as far away from the window as possible. "Get away!" she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "Get away from me!" The wolf flinched. It whined, a high-pitched sound that vibrated through the glass. It raised a paw and gently tapped the window. Zoe saw the claws. They were 3 inches long. They tapped against the glass like knives. "Don't eat me!" she sobbed. She fumbled for the chili oil spray, her fingers numb and useless. She dropped it. It rolled under the seat. "Please, God, don't eat me!" She grabbed her purse and threw it at the window. It hit the glass with a thud. The wolf recoiled. It took a step back, its ears flattening against its skull. It looked hurt. It looked confused. It lowered its body to the ground, trying to make itself smaller, dragging its belly on the concrete in a submissive crawl. Zoe didn't see submission. She saw a predator crouching to pounce. "Go away!" she yelled, curling into a ball in the footwell of the passenger seat, covering her head with her arms. "Leave me alone! Leave me alone!" Outside, the massive black wolf stopped moving. It sat on its haunches, staring at the woman curling into herself in terror. It let out a long, mournful howl at the moon, a sound of absolute heartbreak. It realized, with crushing clarity, that it had made a terrible mistake. It hadn't shown her a protector. It had shown her a monster. Declan's consciousness surfaced through the wolf's instinct. The urge to comfort her was overwhelming, but he knew that if he touched that car again, she might die of fright. He backed away. He retreated into the shadows of the abandoned mill to change back, leaving Zoe sobbing in the safety of the locked G-Wagon. Chapter 15. The Silent Drive. The drive back to the city was a funeral procession for a relationship that had barely begun. Declan had dressed in the spare clothes he kept in the trunk. He was human again, but he looked wrecked. His skin was pale, sweat causing his hair to stick to his forehead. He gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. Zoe sat pressed against the passenger door, as far away from him as physics allowed. She was shivering violently. She wouldn't look at him. Every time he shifted gears, she flinched, her eyes darting to his hands, checking for claws. "Zoe," Declan whispered, the silence becoming suffocating. "I would never hurt you." "Don't," Zoe said. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. "Don't talk to me. Just drive." "I needed you to know," he said, staring straight ahead at the dark road. "I couldn't lie to you anymore." "You're a monster," she whispered. It wasn't an insult, it was a statement of fact, a categorization. "You turned into a monster in a parking lot. You broke your own bones, Declan. I heard them break." Declan flinched as if she had struck him. "It's what I am. It's not all I am." "It's enough," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's enough." They pulled up to the curb of the laundromat. Before the G-Wagon had even come to a complete stop, Zoe had the door open. "Zoe, wait!" She jumped out, stumbling on the sidewalk. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She sprinted for the door of her building, fumbling with her keys, dropping them, picking them up with a frantic, terrified haste. Declan watched her go. He watched the light in her upstairs window turn on. He sat there for a long time, listening. With his enhanced hearing, he heard her footsteps thudding across the floor. He heard the heavy scrape of wood on wood. She was pushing her dresser in front of the door. She was barricading herself in. Against him. Declan leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. The wolf inside him howled in misery, scratching at the walls of his mind, desperate to get to its mate. But the man knew better. He put the truck in gear and drove to the end of the block. He parked in the shadows, cut the engine, and settled in to watch her window. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster, and he wasn't leaving her unprotected, even if she never spoke to him again. Chapter 16. Withdrawal Symptoms. For 3 days, Zoe Prentiss lived in a fortress of her own making. The heavy oak dresser remained wedged against the front door, a physical manifestation of her terror. She hadn't moved it in 3 days. The apartment was stifling, and she was running out of water, but the thought of stepping into the hallway made her chest tight with panic. She wasn't sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, the image replayed behind her eyelids. The sickening snap of Declan's spine, the way his jaw had unhinged, the guttural, wet sound of a man becoming a beast. "It's not real," she whispered to herself, pacing the small length of her rug. It was a hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning, stress-induced psychosis. But then she would remember the chili oil spray. She had searched her pockets a dozen times. She had turned her purse inside out. The spray was gone. She had dropped it in the footwell of that luxury tank he drove, right before the wolf, the thing, had tapped on the glass with claws the length of steak knives. Without her weapon, Zoe felt naked. She felt like prey. She tried to work. The rent was still due, and Mrs. Higgins had slipped a passive-aggressive note under the door about foreign dog noises again. Zoe set up her mixing station on the kitchen table, lining up vials of patchouli and bergamot. She uncapped the jasmine. Her hands shook so violently that the bottle slipped. It shattered on the linoleum. The scent bloomed in the small room, heavy, floral, and suffocating. Zoe stared at the broken glass, and to her horror, she burst into tears. "Get a grip, Prentiss!" she scolded herself, wiping her face with her sleeve. "You are a grown woman. You survived foster care. You survived business school dropouts. You can survive a breakup with a werewolf." Werewolf. Even thinking the word made her feel insane. Tabby, who had been roosting on top of the refrigerator, hopped down. He approached her cautiously, his head cocked to the side. He let out a soft, confused "Bork?" Usually, Zoe would scoop him up and complain about men. Today, she flinched when the bird moved too fast. "Don't," she whispered, backing away until her hips hit the counter. "Just stay over there, Tabby." The rooster froze. He looked at her, then at the door barricaded by the dresser. He sensed the fear radiating off her, a sharp, acidic smell that filled the apartment. For the first time in their cohabitation, the bird didn't demand attention. He simply sat on the floor, settling his feathers, and watched the door as if expecting the monster to come back. Zoe sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was starving. She had run out of ramen yesterday, but the thought of going outside, of walking down the dark hallway, paralyzed her. She missed Declan. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She missed the way he loomed over her stall. She missed the heat of his hand. She missed the feeling of safety that she hadn't realized she relied on until it was ripped away, replaced by the knowledge that the safety was just a mask for something predatory. "I hate him," she whispered to the empty room. "I hate him for making me scared of him." Chapter 17. The Watcher. Declan O'Malley had not slept in 72 hours. He sat in the driver's seat of the G-Wagon, parked 3 spots down from the laundromat. The engine was off, the windows tinted to opacity. To a passerby, the car looked empty. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee and misery. His wolf was howling. It was a constant, keening sound in the back of his mind, a demand to breach the building, tear down the door, and curl around the mate until her fear scent dissipated. "No," Declan told the beast, gripping the steering wheel until the leather groaned. "We broke her. We stay away." A sharp rap on the window startled him. He didn't jump, his reflexes were too fast for that, but his head snapped toward the glass. Benji stood there, looking wet and miserable in the Seattle drizzle. Declan rolled the window down 2 inches. "You look like hell," Benji observed. "Actually, hell probably has better grooming standards. Have you eaten?" "No." "Go home, Declan. I'll take the watch." "No." Benji sighed, adjusting his suspenders. He gestured to the sidewalk behind him. "Well, I brought the peace offering. It wasn't easy, by the way. I had to haul it into the back of my truck because the engine was dead. I looked ridiculous lifting a neon pink scooter in the rain." Declan looked past him. Parked neatly on the curb, right in front of the laundromat entrance, was the neon pink Vespa. It looked garish and small against the gray pavement. It was the chariot of a woman who refused to be ignored, and seeing it abandoned in that dark alleyway had hurt Declan more than he cared to admit. "She needs it," Declan rasped. "She can't make money without it." "She's not coming out, Dec," Benji said softly. "Mrs. Higgins said she hasn't seen her in 3 days. The lights are on, but no one leaves." Declan felt a sharp pang of guilt in his gut. She was starving herself. Because of him. "She won't take anything from me," Declan said. "She thinks I'm a monster." "You are a monster," Benji corrected, not unkindly. "You're just usually a well-dressed one. Look, leave the scooter. Maybe she'll see it from the window. It's a start, but you can't sit here forever. The pack is getting restless. The Southern Territories are asking why the Alpha is living in a car in Fremont." "Let them ask," Declan growled, rolling the window up. He watched Benji walk away. He looked up at the second-floor window. The light was still on. He reached into the passenger seat. Underneath it, rolling around on the floor mat, was a small plastic spray bottle filled with chili oil. He picked it up. He was a ridiculous weapon. Homemade, spicy, completely ineffective against a lichen. But she had tried to use it. She had tried to defend herself. He placed the bottle carefully in the cup holder. He would return it to her, eventually, when she didn't look at him with terror in her eyes. Until then, he would sit in the dark, watching the door, making sure that the only monster she had to worry about was him. Chapter 18. The Supply Drop. Hunger eventually overruled fear. On the morning of the 4th day, Zoe dragged the dresser away from the door. Her stomach was cramping so badly she felt lightheaded. She needed food, even if it meant sprinting to the bodega on the corner and sprinting back. She unlocked the deadbolt, her hand shaking, and cracked the door open. She expected to see him. She expected the massive frame of the Alpha filling the hallway, demanding entry. The hallway was empty, but her doormat was not. Sitting neatly, aligned with the doorframe, were 3 heavy paper grocery bags. Next to them was a white envelope. Zoe stared at them. She didn't step out. She nudged the nearest bag with the toe of her boot. It didn't explode. It smelled of roast chicken, and fresh bread, and strawberries. Her stomach let out a traitorous growl, loud enough to startle Tabby inside the apartment. She crouched down and picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a stack of cash, 50s and 20s. No note, no demand, just cold, hard currency. Wolf money, Zoe whispered. It felt heavy in her hand. This was guilt money. This was, sorry I turned into a nightmare and traumatized you, money. Logic told her to take it. She was broke. She was hungry. This money would pay the rent for 2 months. The food would stop the dizzy spells. But pride, that jagged, stubborn shard of glass in her chest, flared up hot and bright. I am not a pet, she hissed. I don't need a keeper. If she took the food, she was accepting the dynamic. She was accepting that she was the weak human who needed the big, strong wolf to provide for her. She was accepting the world where monsters existed, and she was just collateral damage. She stood up. She took a deep breath. She stepped over the bags. She didn't bring them inside. She didn't touch the cash. With a groan of frustration, she kicked the bags and the envelope inside her apartment and slammed the door. She hated herself for it, but she grabbed the cash. It was enough to cover the rent that was nearly a week late. She would pay him back every cent, but she wasn't going to let herself get evicted. I can feed myself, she said to the empty hallway. She walked down the stairs, her legs trembling from lack of calories, clutching her purse. When she stepped out onto the street, she saw it, the pink Vespa, parked right in front. She stopped. Her throat tightened. He had brought it back. Or had someone bring it back? It sat there like an apology painted in neon. Zoe stared at the scooter. This she needed. She couldn't sell perfume without transport. She couldn't survive without mobility. She walked over to it. She dug the key out of her pocket, where it had been burning a hole for days, and jammed it into the ignition. Fine, she muttered, straddling the seat. I'll take the ride, but I'm buying my own sandwich. She kicked the engine to life. It backfired. Pow! A familiar, comforting sound in a world that had gone quiet and terrifying. She pulled away from the curb, refusing to look at the black SUV parked 3 cars down. Chapter 19. The Breaking Point. Returning to Pike Place Market felt like stepping onto a different planet. The noise, the tourists, the smell of fish, it was all aggressively normal. Zoe set up her table with mechanical movements. She looked terrible. Her overalls were wrinkled, there were dark circles under her eyes, and she had lost weight. You look like you have the flu, a neighboring vendor, a nice woman who sold honey, commented. Something like that, Zoe muttered, arranging her bottles. Bad sushi. She sat on her stool, waiting for the customers. She waited for the looming presence over her shoulder. She waited for the heat of him, the scent of pine, the silent intimidation that kept the weirdos away. There was nothing, just the damp Seattle air and the indifference of the crowd. Well, well, look who crawled out of her hole. Zoe stiffened. She looked up to see Gary standing in front of her booth. He looked emboldened. He was chewing gum loudly, rocking back on his heels. He looked left, then right, checking the perimeter. When he confirmed that the giant in the charcoal suit was nowhere to be seen, a nasty grin spread across his face. Where's your boyfriend? Gary sneered. Finally realized you weren't worth the headache? Dumped you for someone with actual inventory? Go away, Gary, Zoe said. Her voice lacked its usual snap. She was just too tired. I don't think I will, Gary said. He leaned over her table, his shadow falling across her face. See, I liked my old spot, and now that your guard dog is gone, I'm thinking about moving back. He reached out and flicked a bottle of citrus punch. It wobbled. Don't, Zoe warned, reaching for her pocket. Her hand grasped empty air. The chili spray. She didn't have it. It was in the G-Wagon. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She was unarmed. She was exhausted. And Gary, sensing the weakness like a shark sensing blood, leaned closer. "What are you gonna do?" Gary laughed. "Cry?" He swept his arm across the table. It wasn't a nudge this time. It was a shove. 5 bottles crashed to the pavement. The smell of lemon and alcohol rose up, stinging her eyes. "Oops," Gary mocked. "Clumsy." Zoe stood up, her hands balling into fists. But she didn't fight. She couldn't. The adrenaline that usually fueled her was gone, drained away by fear and hunger. She felt small. She felt entirely, devastatingly alone. "Clean it up, Prentiss," Gary spat, "or I'll call the market director and report you for littering." He walked away, laughing. Zoe stood there, staring at the broken glass. She didn't cry. She just felt a hollow ache in her chest where her heart used to be. She crouched down and began to pick up the shards, cutting her finger on a piece of glass. She watched the bead of red blood well up, wishing, just for a second, for a monster to come and scare the bad men away. Chapter 20. The Storm. The rain started at sunset, and by midnight it was a deluge. It was a classic Pacific Northwest storm, wind howling through the alleyways, rain hammering against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The old building groaned under the assault. Inside apartment 2B, the power had gone out an hour ago. Zoe sat on her futon, wrapped in a blanket, lit by the flickering flame of a midnight jasmine candle. The shadows in the room stretched long and dancing, turning the piles of clothes into lurking beasts. Tabby was pacing. The rooster usually slept like the dead once the lights went out, but tonight he was agitated. He kept making low, guttural clucking sounds, staring at the front door. "It's just the wind, Tabs," Zoe whispered. Her voice trembled. The apartment felt too exposed. The lock on the door felt flimsy. Without the hum of the refrigerator or the streetlights outside, the silence was heavy. She had pushed the dresser back in front of the door, but it didn't make her feel safer. She knew now that there were things in this world that could snap oak furniture like toothpicks. Thump! It came from the hallway. Zoe froze. She held her breath. Scritch! Scritch! It sounded like metal on metal, like someone testing the lock. "Mrs. Higgins?" Zoe called out, though she knew Mrs. Higgins was deaf and asleep. There was no answer, just a pause in the scratching. Zoe's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around for a weapon. Her chili spray was gone. Her kitchen knives were in the sink, too far away. She grabbed the closest heavy object, a solid glass jug of distilled water. The doorknob turned. It jiggled violently, hitting the lock. Then, a voice, rough, unfamiliar, and definitely not Declan's, muttered from the other side. "Damn thing's stuck. Kick it!" Zoe scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner of the room, clutching the water jug. This wasn't Declan. Declan didn't need to pick locks. Declan didn't bring friends. Crack! The wood around the deadbolt splintered. The door flew open, slamming into the dresser barricade with a deafening boom. The dresser held, but barely. It slid a few inches across the floor, groaning. "Push it!" the voice yelled. Zoe stared at the widening gap between the door and the frame. A hand reached through, a dirty hand with tattooed knuckles. She wasn't dealing with wolves tonight. She was dealing with men. And somehow, that was just as terrifying. Chapter 21. The Break-In. The heavy oak dresser groaned as it slid another inch across the hardwood floor. It was a solid piece of furniture, inherited from a grandmother Zoe barely remembered, but against the force of 2 grown men kicking the door, it was losing the battle. Zoe retreated until her back hit the cold plaster of the far wall. The glass water jug in her hands was heavy, slippery with the condensation of her own fear. "Push it!" the voice on the other side snarled. With a final, sickening crack of splintering wood, the doorframe gave way. The door swung inward, catching the edge of the dresser and toppling it sideways with a thunderous crash that shook the floorboards. Two men stepped into the apartment. They weren't supernatural monsters. They were worse. They were mundane, hired muscle, wearing soaking wet hoodies and smelling of stale tobacco and rain. One held a crowbar, the other had empty hands but knuckles that looked like they had seen plenty of street fights. "Well, look at this," the one with the crowbar sneered, scanning the room illuminated only by the flickering midnight jasmine candle. "Gary said you were feisty. Didn't say you were holed up like a doomsday prepper." "Get out!" Zoe shouted, hoisting the jug. "I've called the police." "Lines are down, sweetheart," the second man grunted, stepping over the fallen dresser. He glanced at her phone, which was sitting uselessly on the kitchen counter behind him. "And unless you can telekinesis that phone into your hand, nobody is coming." He lunged. Zoe didn't think, she threw. The heavy glass jug sailed through the air. It missed the man's head by inches, shattering against the doorframe in an explosion of glass and water. The distraction worked for exactly 1 second. Then, from the top of the refrigerator, vengeance descended. Tabby, who had been watching with bead-black eyes, launched himself into the fray. He didn't crow, he screeched, a prehistoric sound that belonged in a Jurassic jungle. He landed squarely on the head of the man with the crowbar, wings flapping violently, beak pecking at ears and scalp. "Get it off! Get it off!" the man screamed, dropping the crowbar to claw at the bird. "Tabby!" Zoe yelled. The second man ignored the bird and charged Zoe. She tried to dodge, but the apartment was too small, too cluttered. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Gary wants a message delivered," he hissed, yanking her forward. "You pack up your little potions and you leave town." Zoe kicked him in the shin, hard. He grunted, but didn't let go. He raised a hand to strike her. Zoe squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. She didn't have her spray. She didn't have her phone. She opened her mouth and let out a scream that tore from the bottom of her lungs, a desperate, terrified plea into the storm. "Declan!" Chapter 22. The Roar. 3 cars down, inside the sealed cabin of the G-Wagon, the world was silent. The rain was a visual blur against the glass, but the soundproofing held the storm at bay. Declan O'Malley was staring at the digital clock on the dashboard, watching the minutes tick by, fighting the urge to drive his car through the front wall of the laundromat building. Then he heard it. To a human ear, it would have been lost in the thunder. But Declan wasn't just human. His hearing was tuned to a specific frequency, the heartbeat, the breath, and the voice of his mate. "Declan!" The scream cut through him like a physical blade. The wolf in his brain didn't just wake up, it took the wheel. Declan didn't open the door. He didn't waste time with the handle. He punched the driver's side door open with enough force to dent the metal hinges, and he was moving before his boots hit the pavement. He didn't run down the sidewalk. He blurred. He covered the distance to the building entrance in a heartbeat, his heart hammering a war rhythm against his ribs. He reached the building. The front door was locked. The intercom panel was a joke. He could rip the door off, run up the stairs, but that was too slow. He looked up. 2nd floor, fire escape. He didn't need a ladder. He jumped, catching the rusted iron railing of the first landing with one hand. He swung himself up, metal groaning under his weight. He vaulted the railing, taking the stairs 3 at a time. He reached the window of apartment 2B. Through the glass, he saw the flickering candlelight. He saw the white blur of the rooster attacking a man. And he saw another man, hand raised, holding Zoe by the arm. The sight of another male touching her, threatening her, shattered whatever restraint Declan had left. He didn't bother opening the window. He roared, a sound that was half man, half beast, and launched himself through the glass. Crash! The window exploded inward. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds. Declan landed in a crouch on the living room rug, water dripping from his coat, his eyes burning with a violence that made the storm outside look tame. The man holding Zoe froze. He looked at the shattered window. He looked at the man who had just come through it. Declan stood up. He was soaking wet, covered in glass dust, and he looked like death incarnate. "Let her go." Chapter 23. Human Shield. The thug holding Zoe was stupid, but he wasn't blind. He dropped Zoe's arm as if she were made of molten lead and stumbled back. "Who the hell are you?" he stammered, reaching into his waistband. Zoe scrambled back against the kitchen counter, her chest heaving. She looked at Declan. She expected to see the wolf. She expected the fur, the snout, the horror. But Declan was human. He was breathing hard, his hands balled into fists, but his face was his own. He placed himself deliberately between Zoe and the intruders, shielding her with his broad back. "You have 5 seconds to leave," Declan said, his voice low and eerily calm. "If you're still here on 6, you aren't leaving at all." "There's 2 of us, buddy," the man with the crowbar said, finally managing to throw Tabby off his head. The rooster landed on the sofa, fluffing his feathers indignantly. "2, Declan agreed. "Unfortunate odds for you." The second man pulled a knife. It was a 6-inch blade, glinting in the candlelight. "Declan!" Zoe screamed. The man lunged. Declan didn't shift. He didn't let the claws come out. He knew Zoe was watching. He knew she was terrified of the monster. So he made a choice. He fought as a man. He caught the attacker's wrist mid-air. He twisted, a sickening snap echoing in the room, and the man howled. But in the scuffle, the first thug swung the crowbar. Declan didn't dodge. If he dodged, the bar would hit Zoe. He stepped into the swing. The steel bar slammed into his shoulder with a meaty thud. Declan grunted, stumbling slightly, but he didn't fall. He grabbed the crowbar with his free hand and ripped it from the man's grip like it was a toy. "My turn," Declan snarled. He headbutted the crowbar guy, sending him crashing into the wall. The knife guy, desperate and stupid, slashed out again. The blade caught Declan's forearm. It sliced deep, through the wet fabric of his shirt and into the muscle. Blood, dark and impossibly warm, sprayed across the floor. Zoe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. He was bleeding. He was hurt. Because he was protecting her. Because he refused to turn into the thing that scared her. "Stay back, Zoe," Declan ordered, not looking at her. He stood firm, blood dripping from his arm, a wall of flesh and determination between her and the threat. Chapter 24. The Golden Eyes. The sight of blood emboldened the thugs. They thought they had hurt him. They thought he was mortal. "Get him!" the knife guy yelled, scrambling up. He pulled something else from his jacket. A gun. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It went from a bar brawl to an execution. "No!" Zoe shrieked. Declan saw the gun. He saw the barrel leveling, not at him, but waving recklessly toward Zoe. The leash snapped. "Enough!" Declan roared. It wasn't a human word. It was a vibration that rattled the remaining glass in the window frames. He didn't fully shift. He kept his human shape, but the glamour fell away. His eyes flooded with iridescent, molten gold. His canines lengthened, pushing past his lips. His fingernails darkened and elongated into black talons. The air pressure in the room dropped. The scent of ozone and predator filled the small space. The thug with the gun froze, his hand shaking. What are you?" Declan moved. He was a blur of motion. He didn't just cross the room, he materialized in front of the gunman. He grabbed the barrel of the gun with one hand. Heat radiated from his grip. The metal of the gun barrel groaned and bent at a 90-degree angle. Declan ripped the ruined weapon from the man's hand and dropped it. "Run!" Declan commanded. His voice was layered, a human voice overlaying a deep, guttural growl. The thugs didn't need to be told twice. They didn't care about Gary. They didn't care about the money. They were staring at a man whose eyes were shining like headlights in the dark. They scrambled over each other to get out the broken door, tripping over the fallen dresser, sprinting down the hallway as if the hounds of hell were snapping at their heels. Declan stood in the center of the ruined apartment, chest heaving. His claws were dug into his palms. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the wolf, forcing the gold to fade, forcing the claws to retract. He was terrifying. He was lethal. And he was shaking. Chapter 25. The Aftermath. Silence rushed back into the apartment, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the rain blowing in through the shattered window. Declan stood with his back to Zoe. He gripped his injured arm. The blood was flowing freely now, dripping onto the woven rug with a steady drip, drip, drip. He didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see her face. He knew what he would find. He had promised to stay away, and instead, he had broken into her home, destroyed her window, and revealed the monster again. "I'll pay for the window," he said, his voice rough and hoarse. "And the door. I'll send Benji to fix it." He took a step toward the fire escape. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I shouldn't have come in. I heard you scream." "Declan!" He stopped. He braced himself for the rejection, for the "get out, monster." "Turn around," Zoe said. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear. Slowly, reluctantly, Declan turned. He kept his eyes lowered, afraid to flash the gold again. Zoe was standing amidst the wreckage of her living room. She was pale. Her hair was a mess. But she wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at his arm. She took a step toward him. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing," Declan lied. "It heals fast." "It's bleeding," Zoe corrected. She walked right up to him. She didn't flinch. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that, moments ago, had bent a steel gun barrel. Her fingers were warm and small against his. She looked at the deep gash on his forearm. Then she looked up at his face. She saw the shame in his eyes. She saw the man who had let himself be beaten with a crowbar rather than frighten her with his strength. The fear that had paralyzed her for a week cracked, and something warm and fierce poured into the gap. "You're bleeding on my rug, O'Malley," she said softly. "And I really liked this rug." Declan sagged, the tension wire in his spine finally snapping. He looked at her, searching for the terror. It was gone. "Zoe," he rasped. "I'm dangerous." "Yeah," Zoe agreed. She tugged on his hand, pulling him away from the window and toward the bathroom. "You are. But you didn't bite them. You just bent their gun, which was, admittedly, very cool." She pushed him down onto the closed toilet lid. She opened the cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. "Sit," she ordered, "and don't drip on the tile." Declan sat. He watched her hands move, steady and capable, as she uncapped the peroxide. For the first time in weeks, the wolf inside him went quiet, soothed not by violence, but by the scent of lavender and the touch of the woman who was cleaning his wounds. Chapter 26. The Choice. The bathroom was small, tiled in vintage seafoam green that had probably been fashionable in the 50s, and currently smelled of rubbing alcohol and rain. Zoe sat on the edge of the tub, while Declan occupied the closed toilet lid like a king upon a porcelain throne. His presence overwhelmed the space. His knees knocked against the sink cabinet. His shoulders looked wide enough to crack the plaster walls. "This is going to sting," Zoe warned, uncapping a bottle of antiseptic witch hazel. "Do it," Declan grunted, his jaw tight. Zoe pressed the soaked cloth to the slash on his forearm. The wound was ugly, a jagged, angry gash where the knife had sliced through muscle. Declan didn't flinch. He didn't even inhale sharply. He just watched her face, his amber eyes tracking her every micro-expression, waiting for the disgust to return. But as Zoe wiped away the blood, something impossible happened. The bleeding stopped. Not gradually, but instantly, as if a faucet had been turned off. Steam, faint white wisps of vapor, began to rise from the open cut. Zoe pulled her hand back, startled. "You're steaming." "Metabolism," Declan murmured, watching the wound. "It burns energy to knit the tissue." Zoe leaned in, her curiosity overriding her lingering fear. She watched in morbid fascination as the edges of the skin began to pull together. It wasn't magic, it was biological acceleration. She could see the fibers reconnecting, the skin sealing itself up like a zipper being pulled closed by an invisible hand. Within 30 seconds, The gaping wound was gone. All that remained was a faint, pink line that looked months old rather than minutes. Zoe let out a shaky exhale. Okay, that is efficient. Does it scare you? Declan asked. His voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way she hadn't heard before. Seeing it up close? Zoe looked at the scar. Then she looked at the bruise forming on his shoulder where the crowbar had hit him. That wasn't healing as fast. He had taken that hit while suppressing his wolf, denying his own biology to keep from frightening her. No, Zoe said honestly. She reached out, her fingertips tracing the fresh pink skin on his arm. It doesn't scare me. What scares me is that you stood there and let them hit you. You could have stopped them instantly. You could have ripped them apart. I promised I wouldn't be a monster, Declan said, his gaze intense. I needed you to see the man first. You took a knife for me, Declan. I would take a bullet, he vowed, the low rumble returning to his chest. I would take a bomb. Do you understand, Zoe? There is nothing I wouldn't endure to keep you whole. The confession hung in the humid air, heavy and absolute. It wasn't a pickup line. It was a statement of physics. Gravity existed, the earth rotated, and Declan O'Malley protected Zoe Prentiss. Zoe felt the walls she had built, the cynicism, the independence, the fear, begin to crack. She looked at this massive, terrifying creature sitting on her toilet lid, bleeding and steaming, and looking at her like she was the sun. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, Zoe repeated, firmer this time. You're not a monster. You're just extremely high maintenance. Chapter 27. The Truce. They moved to the living room, which was currently a disaster zone. The window was shattered, rain blowing in and soaking the rug. The door was hanging off its hinges. Tabby was perched on the back of the sofa, looking traumatized but smug. Declan surveyed the damage with a critical eye. I'll have a crew here in an hour to secure the perimeter. No crew, Zoe said, grabbing a roll of duct tape. You can nail a board over the window for tonight. We are not turning my apartment into a construction site at 2 a.m. Zoe, the door is destroyed. You are vulnerable. I have you, Zoe pointed out, ripping a strip of tape with her teeth. Declan went still. The validation hit him harder than the crowbar had. She accepted his protection. Yes, he said, his voice thick. You have me. But, Zoe held up a finger, we need ground rules. If you're going to be around, in my life. Declan nodded solely. Name them. First, Zoe ticked off on her fingers. No pack politics. I don't want to know about territory wars or council meetings or who peed on whose hydrant. I sell perfume. That is my lane. You keep the werewolf drama at the office. Agreed, Declan said immediately. You are civilian, neutral ground. Second, Zoe continued, no sleeping in your car. It's creepy, and Mrs. Higgins thinks you're a fed. If you're worried about me, you sleep on the couch. Or inside, like a person. Done, Declan said, trying to hide his eagerness. Third, Zoe pointed to the rooster, you apologize to Tabby. Declan blinked. He looked at the white bird, who glared back with soulless obsidian eyes. The chicken? He saved me, Zoe said fiercely. He attacked the guy with the crowbar. He is a war hero, Declan, and you offended him last week. Apologize. Declan O'Malley, alpha of the Seattle Pack, a man who commanded hundreds of wolves and controlled the shipping logistics of the Pacific Northwest, sighed. He walked over to the sofa. He lowered his head until he was eye level with the bird. I apologize, Declan grumbled. You fought well. You are a formidable bird. Tabby puffed out his chest, let out a soft buck-buck, and then audaciously pecked Declan's nose. He accepts, Zoe translated, hiding a smile. Now, go fix my window before we both drown. Chapter 28. Domesticity. The storm raged outside, but inside, the apartment had settled into a strange, cozy rhythm. Declan had found a spare sheet of plywood and a rusty toolkit in the basement, after terrorizing the lock on the storage unit, and hammered the board over the broken window. The sound of the rain was now a muffled drumbeat against the wood. He had wedged the broken door back into the frame and shoved the heavy dresser against it to hold it shut until morning. Now, the apartment felt like a bunker. A very small, lavender-scented bunker. Zoe watched him from the kitchen. He had taken off his ruined, bloody shirt. His torso was a masterpiece of violence, broad muscles, a scattering of dark hair, and scars that told stories she wasn't sure she wanted to hear yet. He was currently trying to fix the leg of her coffee table, which had been knocked askew during the fight. He looked absurdly large in her living room. When he stood up, he made the ceiling look low. "You're too big for this apartment," Zoe observed, handing him a glass of whiskey. "It's like keeping a grizzly bear in a dollhouse." "I fit where I need to fit," Declan said, taking the glass. His hand swallowed it completely. He took a sip and grimaced. "This is cheap." "It's medicinal," Zoe said. "It calms the nerves. Drink it. You're vibrating." He was. The adrenaline of the fight, combined with the proximity of his mate, had him humming with kinetic energy. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to pull her into his lap and scent mark every inch of her skin so no one would ever dare touch her again. "I don't need tea," Declan said, setting the mug down. He stepped closer to her, crowding her space in the tiny kitchenette. "I need you to tell me you're okay. Really okay." "I'm okay," Zoe whispered. She didn't back away this time. She looked up at him, tilting her chin. "You came back." "I never left," he corrected. "I was just waiting for permission." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. When she didn't flinch, he brushed his knuckles against her cheekbone. The touch was electric. It sent a jolt straight to Zoe's core, melting the last icy remnants of the week's terror. "You're tired," Declan murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "You haven't slept in days." "Neither have you," Zoe countered. "Your eyes are red." "I can't sleep when you're in danger." "I'm not in danger anymore," Zoe said. She reached up and placed her hand over his heart. It was beating slow and strong, a heavy rhythm against her palm. "The monster is guarding the door." Declan's eyes darkened, the gold flecks swirling in the brown. "Yes," he rasped. "He is." Chapter 29. The Bathtub. "You still have blood on you," Zoe noted, her voice dropping to a hush. She traced a dried smear of red on his bruised shoulder. "And glass dust." "The shower is too small," Declan said. "I won't fit." "I know," Zoe said. She glanced toward the bathroom. "But the tub is a clawfoot. It's deep." The invitation hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. They moved to the bathroom. Zoe turned on the taps, letting the hot water fill the porcelain tub. She added a few drops of sandalwood oil, a scent she knew he tolerated. The steam rose up, fogging the mirror, creating a private, misty world. Declan stood by the sink, watching her. When the tub was full, Zoe turned to him. "Get in," she said softly. He stripped off his jeans. Zoe didn't look away. She couldn't. He was magnificent, a creature built for power, and yet he moved with a careful, restrained grace, as if terrified of breaking something in her fragile world. He settled into the water with a groan of relief. The water displaced dangerously high, lapping at the rim. Zoe knelt beside the tub. She picked up a sponge. "Lean back," she ordered. Declan obeyed, resting his head against the porcelain rim, closing his eyes. Zoe began to wash him. She scrubbed the blood from his arm, the dirt from his chest. She moved the sponge over the heavy muscles of his shoulders, feeling the tension slowly bleed out of him. "Zoe," he breathed, his voice rough. "Hush," she whispered. "Let me take care of you." She rinsed the sponge and moved to his neck. He tilted his head back, exposing his throat, a gesture of absolute trust from an apex predator. Zoe dropped the sponge. She reached out with her bare hands, lathering soap over his chest. Her fingers skimmed over his wet skin, exploring the landscape of him. The heat radiating from him made the water feel tepid in comparison. Declan's eyes opened. They were burning gold. He reached up, his wet hand curling around the nape of her neck, pulling her down. "Come in with me," he demanded. "I'm fully dressed, Declan." "Fix that." Zoe hesitated for a heartbeat, then stood. She unhooked the straps of her overalls and let the heavy denim slide to the floor, stepping out of the pile. She shrugged off the flannel shirt. She climbed into the tub, straddling his lap. The water sloshed over the sides, soaking the bath mat, but neither of them cared. Declan let out a growl that vibrated against her skin as she settled against him. His arms wrapped around her, locking her in place. It wasn't the cage she had feared. It was an anchor. "You smell like lavender," he murmured, burying his face in her neck, inhaling deeply. Soft, calming lavender. "And you smell like trouble," Zoe whispered back, threading her fingers through his damp hair. He kissed her then, a searing, possessive claim that erased the memory of fear and replaced it with fire. It was a surrender, not of her independence, but of her solitude. She kissed him back with everything she had, sealing the treaty between the alchemist and the wolf in steam and silence. Chapter 30. Domestic Bliss. Sort of. Morning light filtered through the bathroom window, the only window in the apartment that wasn't boarded up with plywood. Zoe woke up in her bed. She didn't remember moving there, which meant Declan had carried her. She stretched, feeling a delightful ache in her muscles, and realized she was alone in the sheets. Panic flared for a microsecond. Had he left? Before the smell hit her. Bacon, coffee, and burning toast. She wrapped the duvet around herself like a toga and padded into the kitchen. The scene that greeted her was domestic comedy at its finest. Declan was standing at the stove. He was wearing his jeans from the night before, but no shirt. He looked entirely too large for the kitchenette. His head was dangerously close to the hanging pot rack. He was holding a spatula with the concentration of a bomb disposal expert. On the floor, Tabby the rooster was pecking aggressively at Declan's bare foot. "Ouch!" Declan muttered, lifting his foot. "Stop it, you dinosaur!" Tabby clucked and pecked the other foot. "Good morning," Zoe said, leaning against the doorframe. Declan turned. His hair was messy, he had a smudge of flour on his nose, and he looked happier than she had ever seen him. "The toaster is aggressive," he informed her gravely. "It ejects the bread with unnecessary force." "It's a vintage toaster, Declan. It has personality." Zoe walked over, shooing the rooster away. "Tabby, leave the alpha alone. He's making breakfast." "I made eggs," Declan said, gesturing to a platter that contained enough scrambled eggs to feed a football team. "And bacon. And I tried to make coffee, but your machine is complicated." "It's a French press," Zoe said, smiling. She walked up to him, standing on her tiptoes to wipe the flour off his nose. "You just push the plunger down." Declan caught her hand and kissed her palm. "I'll buy you a new machine, one with buttons." "I like my manual labor," Zoe teased. "So, what's the plan, O'Malley? Do you have to go run the world today?" Declan's expression tightened slightly. "I have to swing by my penthouse to change, unless you want the CEO arriving shirtless, and then go to the office. Benji has been handling things, but I need to show my face." "To who?" "To the people who ensure Gary never works in the city again," Declan said, his voice dropping to a cool, lethal temperature. "Declan," Zoe warned, "no murder." "No murder," he agreed innocently. "Just aggressive bureaucratic restructuring." "Fine," Zoe grabbed a piece of bacon, "but then you're coming back, because we need to discuss how you're going to fit a king-sized bed in this room. I refuse to sleep on a cramped futon with a werewolf ever again. You take up 80% of the space." Declan grinned, a wolfish, possessive expression. "I'll buy the building. We'll knock down a wall." "We are not buying the building," Zoe laughed. "Eat your eggs, Alpha. You have a big day of frightening people ahead of you." Chapter 31. The Alpha's Hen. O'Malley Logistics was exactly what Zoe expected. a skyscraper of glass and steel that screamed corporate intimidation. The lobby was silent, the air conditioning was too cold, and the security guards looked like they had been bred in a laboratory for neck width. Zoe marched through the revolving doors, her boots squeaking on the polished marble. She was wearing her serious business overalls, the black denim ones, and carrying a travel mug of tea. "Name?" the security guard grunted, not looking up from his tablet. "Zoe Prentiss," she said. "I'm here to see the CEO, and I brought him lunch." The guard looked up, his eyes widened. He didn't check a list, he didn't ask for ID. He turned a shade of pale usually reserved for cave-dwelling fish. "Miss Prentiss," he stammered, scrambling to stand up. He nearly knocked over his chair. Yes, go right up. Top floor, private elevator. Do you need an escort? Do you need me to carry the bag?" "I can manage a sandwich, thanks," Zoe said, eyeing him suspiciously. "Relax, big guy. I'm not going to bite." She walked to the elevator, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on her back. Apparently, word had gotten out that the alpha had a mate and that she was terrifying. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Benji was waiting. He looked like he had aged 5 years in the last week. "Zoe," Benji breathed, adjusting his suspenders. "Thank God. He's prowling." "Prowling?" "He's in a mood," Benji whispered, leading her down the corridor. "He's restructuring the shipping routes to cut off Gary's supplier, but he's doing it with a lot of growling. The interns are hiding in the server room." Zoe pushed open the double mahogany doors to Declan's office. It was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the rain-swept city. Declan stood behind a desk the size of a refined aircraft carrier, barking orders into a phone. "I don't care if the contract is binding," he snarled. "Find a loophole, or buy the shipping company. I want that supply chain severed by noon." He looked up. He saw Zoe. The transformation was instantaneous. The snarl vanished, replaced by a look of softness that probably confused the person on the other end of the line. "I have to go," Declan said, hanging up on what was likely a very expensive lawyer. He walked around the desk. "Zoe, you're here." "I brought food," Zoe said, holding up a paper bag. "And to check on Benji. He looks like he's about to have a stroke." "Benji is fine," Declan dismissed. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself. "You smell like lavender." "And you smell like stress," Zoe mumbled into his chest. She pulled back and looked around the office. It was stark, gray, and devoid of personality. "This place is depressing, Declan. No wonder you're grumpy. You need plants. And maybe a rug that doesn't look like it belongs in a prison." "You can redecorate," Declan offered immediately. "Do whatever you want. Fire Benji. Paint the walls pink. Just stay." From the doorway, Benji made a squeaking sound. "I'm not firing Benji," Zoe rolled her eyes. "But I am reorganizing your break room coffee situation. I saw the machine. It's a crime against caffeine." She marched past him toward the break room. Declan watched her go, a look of pure, unadulterated adoration on his face. Benji crept into the room. "Sir, the supply chain?" "Cancel the meeting," Declan said, not taking his eyes off the doorway where Zoe had disappeared. "I'm going to watch her yell at the coffee pot." Chapter 32. Scent Theory. That evening, the air in Zoe's apartment was thick with the smell of experimentation. Declan sat on the floor of the living room. The sofa was currently occupied by Tabby, watching Zoe work. She had lined up dozens of small amber vials on the coffee table. She was mixing, sniffing, and frowning with the intensity of a bomb squad technician. "What are you making?" Declan asked. "You," Zoe said, holding a pipette. "I'm making you." "I am right here." "I'm making a scent profile," she corrected. "Everyone has a base note. Most people smell like laundry detergent or sweat. You're complicated." She uncapped a bottle of cedarwood. She added a drop of petrichor, the scent of rain on dry earth. Then she hesitated. It was the first thing I noticed, she admitted softly, not looking at him. In the market, before I knew what you were. Underneath the vanilla disaster, you smelled like a storm. It was electric. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Declan shifted, his wolf preening at the compliment. It's pheromones. Biology. No, Zoe shook her head. It's alchemy. Biology is boring. Scent is memory. She added a single drop of bergamot, something sharp and citrusy to cut through the heavy earth tones. She swirled the mixture and held it out to him. Smell! Declan leaned forward. He inhaled. It smelled like the forest at midnight. It smelled like power. But the citrus note, that was new. That was bright. That was her. It smells like us, he said, his voice rough. Exactly, Zoe smiled, capping the bottle. I'm calling it the Alpha. I'm going to charge $50 a bottle. You are capitalizing on my scent? Declan raised an eyebrow, amused. I have a business to run, O'Malley, and since you scared away half my customer base last week, you owe me the licensing rights. She crawled over the table, careful not to knock over the oils, and settled into his lap. Declan wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. You can sell whatever you want, he murmured against her throat, as long as you keep the original for yourself. Deal, Zoe whispered. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. But seriously, if you growl at a customer, I'm spraying you with the sugar bomb again. I love you, Declan said. It was the first time he had said it out loud. He didn't make a big production of it, he just stated it like a fact. Zoe froze. Then she softened, melting into him. I know, she said. I love you too, even if you are a high-maintenance canine. Chapter 33. Gary's Demise. Saturday morning at Pike Place Market was war, but this time Zoe had heavy artillery. She stood at her booth, which had been restocked and reorganized. The sugar bomb surprise was gone, replaced by rows of sleek amber bottles labeled The Alpha. Across the aisle, Gary was sweating. He had returned to his spot, smug and loud, hawking his plastic sunglasses. But his smugness was rapidly evaporating as he watched two men in tailored suits approach his booth. Zoe watched from her stool, sipping her tea. Declan stood behind her. He wasn't looming today. He was leaning casually against a pillar, reading a newspaper. But his presence was a heavy, silent weight that kept the entire block on best behavior. Mr. Gary Wilson? One of the suits asked. Yeah? Gary snapped. You buying or looking? Serving, the man said. He handed Gary a thick envelope. This is a cease and desist regarding the sale of counterfeit goods. Also, an eviction notice from the market board for violation of sanitation codes, harassment policies, and operating a business without a valid city permit. Gary's face turned purple. What? I have a permit! It expired in 2019, the lawyer said blandly. Also, the IRS would like a word about your unreported cash income for the last 5 years. Gary spun around, glaring at Zoe. You did this! Zoe didn't flinch. She smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile that she had definitely learned from Declan. I didn't do anything, Gary, she said sweetly. I just sell perfume. But my boyfriend, well, he's very good at logistics and paperwork. Declan lowered his newspaper. He looked at Gary. His eyes didn't glow, but they were cold enough to freeze hell over. Pack it up, Declan said softly. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. Gary looked at the lawyers. He looked at the massive man who had once lifted his entire stall. He looked at Zoe, who was watching him with zero sympathy. He packed. He threw his sunglasses into a duffel bag and fled, muttering curses. The crowd, sensing the drama was over, went back to buying tulips and fish. Aggressive bureaucratic restructuring, Zoe noted, watching Gary disappear. Sexy. I try, Declan said, folding his newspaper. Now, sell your potions, witch. I have a dinner reservation to make. Chapter 34. The Future. Moving day was a spectacle. Zoe had refused to let Declan hire movers because she didn't trust strangers with her beakers. This resulted in the alpha of the Seattle pack carrying boxes of essential oils down the narrow staircase while a rooster pecked at his heels. "Why does he have so much stuff?" Declan grumbled, carrying a crate labeled Tabby's Toys. "He is a bird. He needs corn and a coop. He does not need a xylophone." "He likes music," Zoe argued, carrying a lamp. "Be careful with that, it's his favorite." They weren't moving into a high-rise. Declan had wanted to. He had offered to move her into his gleaming glass penthouse overlooking the Sound, but Zoe had refused. She needed ground. She needed dirt. So, Declan had bought a house. It was a Craftsman in Queen Anne, with a massive backyard, a high fence, and a detached garage that had been converted into a state-of-the-art scent laboratory. "It has a porch," Zoe said, standing on the sidewalk, looking up at the house. "I've always wanted a porch." "It has a high fence," Declan countered, standing beside her. "So I can run the perimeter without getting arrested." He slipped his arm around her waist. They stood there for a moment, the oddest couple in the neighborhood, the petite alchemist in overalls and the massive lichen king in a t-shirt. "Mrs. Higgins cried when we left," Zoe said. "She cried because I gave her a check for $10,000 for emotional distress and the noise violation," Declan corrected. "No, she's going to miss Tabby. She finally admitted he was a good dog." Declan chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Come on, let's go home." He scooped her up, bridal style. Zoe squealed, dropping her bag. "Declan, put me down!" "Tradition," he said, walking up the steps, carrying the mate over the threshold. "We aren't married," Zoe pointed out, looping her arms around his neck. "Give me time," Declan promised, kicking the front door open. "I'm working on it." As they disappeared inside, Tabby the rooster strutted up the walkway, looked at the new house, let out a loud crow of approval, and marched in after them to claim the master bedroom. Chapter 35. Epilogue. 13 years later. The garden was in full bloom. It was a chaotic riot of jasmine, roses, and lavender, meticulously tended to by the owner of the Alpha's Scent, now a global fragrance brand. In the center of the garden stood a statue. It was bronze, life-sized, and depicted a rooster looking majestic and angry. The plaque read, "Tabby, the First Defender." Zoe Prentiss, now Zoe O'Malley, stood in front of the statue. At 35, she looked tired but happy. There were laugh lines around her eyes and a confidence in her stance that hadn't been there a decade ago. "Happy birthday." A deep voice rumbled from behind her. Declan hadn't aged a day. If anything, the gray at his temples just made him look more dangerous. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "The kids are asleep," he whispered. "Finally." "The twins are terrors," Zoe agreed. "They get it from you. One of them growled at the mailman today." Declan laughed. "Good instincts." He turned her around. His expression grew serious. "You've been asking, for months." Zoe nodded. "I'm ready, Dec. I'm 35. The business runs itself. The kids are half wolf. I'm the only human in this house. I want to run with you. Really run." She had insisted on waiting. She wanted to build her life, her career, and her family as a human first. She wanted to know she was his equal in spirit before she became his equal in biology. "It will hurt," Declan warned, tracing her jawline. "I know. I saw you do it once, remember? In a parking lot. It was gross." "It will be better this time," he promised. "I'll be there." He leaned down. He didn't hesitate. He bit her, a sharp, claiming puncture right where her neck met her shoulder. The pain was electric, hot and sharp, but it faded instantly, replaced by a rush of adrenaline and power. Zoe gasped, falling against him. "Breathe," Declan coached. "Let it happen." Zoe closed her eyes. She felt the shift. It wasn't the horror show she remembered. It felt like unlocking a door she hadn't known was there. Her body became liquid, reshaping itself with a dizzying rush of heat. The world sharpened, smells exploded in her nose, sounds became crystal clear. She dropped to all fours. She opened her eyes. She was lower to the ground. She felt powerful, sleek, lethal. She looked at her paws, beautiful, snowy white fur. "I am majestic," she thought. "I am the moon goddess." She looked at Declan, who had shifted into his massive black wolf form. He looked at her with adoration. "Run," his voice echoed in her mind. Zoe let out a yip of excitement. She pushed off her back legs, ready to sprint into the forest, ready to embrace her destiny as the Luna. She took one step,